Welcome to another video, everyone. Today I'm going to be testing the Olympus PT-EP14, which is the underwater dive housing for the EM1 Mark II. I've been shooting with the PT-EP11, which is a housing for the EM1 Mark I, for the last 2 years, and I've actually been misusing it for surf photography, and I just want to test this housing today with the new camera and see how it performs for surf photography. Before we start, I want to compare the two housings, see what's changed, what's new, what's different, and talk about how I set up my camera for action sports photography, particularly surfing, but I think you can use it for all kinds of action sports. Let's get going. First of all, the two housings are quite similar. They look very similar. The new one's a lot bigger and thicker because the camera obviously is thicker. But there's a few things they've changed that I really like. So a lot of design and thought has gone into this housing, particularly the shutter button, which is probably the most important button. It's a much longer travel, so I can actually use the half focusing, or I can use the focus function on my shutter button and then use it as a shutter as well. They've also changed the wheels a little bit. Some of the wheels have double cogs in them, so the direction of your wheels actually doesn't change compared to the previous housing where every wheel direction would go in the other way. So you'd be turning a wheel and increasing your shutter speed would actually decrease it, so it'd be really confusing when you're swimming out there. Obviously something that can be changed inside the camera, so you could set a custom mode to change it, but if you forget about it, it can get really annoying. The locking mechanism has changed as well, so we can see that there's a triple mechanism here. They've got a lock in here to lock the whole function, and then the slide up, a piece that you slide up, and then finally something that unlocks the housing. Previously it would have just been a little thing that slides back, so it's actually quite a weak locking mechanism, and a twist to open it. So only 2 functions here to lock the housing and 3 here, so it's just an improvement, which is nice. I've never had any problems with the old one, but it's obviously nice to know that your housing and your camera is even safer inside the housing. A lot of thought has gone into it. I really like it. The build quality is very similar, very much the same material and look and feel. There's 2 different types of ports that you'll be using. One's a flat port, one's a dome port. Flat ports, the big difference obviously is the shape, but flat ports you'll be shooting dry, and dome ports you'll be shooting wet. Now, Olympus ports are made of glass, so they're really high quality. They're a bit heavier than your average port, but it's really great because I can use Rain-X on these ports to keep them dry. So if I'm out in the water, I can pull this up and out of the water as many times as I want, and it'll always be dry. Now, if you're shooting with acrylic or plastic ports, which is usually the case, I really recommend not using Rain-X or any chemicals on your ports. They'll ruin your ports, they'll go milky, strange, and you have to throw them away and buy new ones. Then dome ports is the other end where you have to shoot wet. So what most people do is spit and lick the ports. That's exactly what I do too. Basically, you want the port to constantly be wet. If you don't have this, what would happen? You'd have drops on your port, and you'll be shooting a wide angle lens in this, so anything that's close to a wide angle lens will be really big in your frame, and drops will completely distort the image and they'll ruin your shots. So you want it to be constantly wet. Let's talk about the camera. The great thing is the housing is made for this camera, so the camera just slides into the housing, the buttons all line up. There's not much you can do wrong. It just pops in there and it's perfect. The one thing you can add is a zoom ring gear, which Olympus makes for every individual lens that fits into the housings, and it just slides onto the lens like this, and it allows you to access the zoom function of the lenses. The really exciting part is that this camera is made for action sports. It shoots up to 60 frames per second, uncompressed 12-bit RAW files, which means you won't miss the action ever. I mean, no other camera can do this, and I just imagine going out into a big wave with a fisheye or a big wide lens and getting right into the action and not missing that last fraction where you get the best surf shot. Other cameras will miss it. So exciting times to be testing this. If you're using continuous focus, so if you're using a long lens and your surfer is coming towards you and you want to make sure every single shot's in focus, the camera still goes up to 18 frames per second in electronic shutter, so it's still top end. There's not many cameras that shoot that fast and still focus in between the shots. So yeah, really excited to test it. One thing, obviously, if you're shooting 60 frames per second, 20.4 megapixel RAW files, you're going to be filling up your memory cards. So the camera has a UHS-II memory card slot, SD card slot. It's an ultra high speed Type 2 slot, and if you get the right memory card, I'm using the Lexar memory cards, the X2000, and they're 300 megabytes per second, 64 gigabyte cards. Those are the best. I've been using those for a couple of months and they really work really well, and the buffer is just cleared pretty much immediately, which is great, especially shooting high frame rates like 60 frames per second. Let's get the camera ready for action sports and then go for a swim. There's a few things you want to do before you head out, of course, because once it's in there, you can't really change anything anymore. You're not going to be able to change your lens while you're out in the surf. So the most important thing is to think about what kind of shot you want before you go out and shoot the shot. Today I'm shooting longboarding. I'm going to be shooting with a long focal length, and it's a bright blue sky, so my settings are going to be set manual. I'm going to be shooting with a 12 to 40, which means I'm shooting a flat port. I'm going to be shooting dry, and from the camera setup, I'm basically going to just shoot at a high frame rate. Since the action is coming towards me, I'll be shooting continuous autofocus. So with electronic shutter, I can shoot up to 18 frames per second. So those are the settings I need for that. And then I'm going to separate the shutter and focus function from this button and bring the focusing to the back button somewhere here. I can allocate almost any button at the back for that. So we're going to split that up. I'm going to write about all that in my blog post, which is linked below. You can read how to separate that function and bring it to any button at the back. There's a lot of detail there to go through. And that's about it. I'd completely forgotten how much fun it is to shoot surf and get out in the ocean and just take your gear out there and be in the middle of it all. The camera performed so much better than I expected it to. Again, every time I take it to capture something new, it performs so much better than I thought it would. The speed and the accuracy of the focusing every time just nails it. I didn't expect it. I hadn't been in the ocean for over a year and I was a bit worried I wouldn't get any good shots of the longboarding action, but turns out I shot some really cool photos. I'm really happy with what I got, so great. The housing, again, it performed perfectly well. I didn't expect it to do anything else really. It's so close to the other design, and it wasn't much work to get used to. There's a few buttons and dials that have changed, and one thing, I might have accidentally turned the wheel every now and then and changed my shutter speed, but then I don't think it's a flaw in the housing. It's more me not being used to this new design and feel of the housing. What I really liked was the viewfinder in here. So the camera has a really good viewfinder, bigger, better viewfinder than the EM1, and the viewfinder in here was actually usable, whereas on the old housing I would always shoot with the screen because shooting with the viewfinder was like looking through a keyhole, and when you're shooting action sports you have to be more aware of what's going on. I had the feeling that with this viewfinder I could actually use it and capture the action with it. That's it for the 10-minute review. Thanks to Olympus for giving me a second housing to film the first one with, and special thanks to John and Rob who helped out with the additional footage in the water and outside on the beach. I really had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Now if you have any questions or comments, or if you want to find out how to set up your camera or set up the housing a little more specifically, there's a super long blog article with all the additional information, extra photos, all that stuff that I couldn't cram into this 10-minute video, and you'll find it all there. It's linked below and I'll make it pop up now as well. And yeah, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment. If you have any specific questions or things like that, leave them below. Subscribe. Until then, I hope to see you next time again for action sports and quick, that are really good, that are really ideal, that are the best settings that you need, that are the best settings, that are the ideal settings for, that are the ideal settings and setup of the camera for action sports.